Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt slaves, sirs, peasants. I am Useful Idiot, and today I'd like to talk about the fact that there's just too much of everything. And when there's too much of something, it loses its value. And that's the heart of my discussion here. And it's a basic economic tenet and probably a universal in general, that the more of something there is, the less value it has. And of course, we see this with diamonds and gold, obvious examples. But I'm going to take this same idea and extrapolate it into the fact that we, as in the 20th century and 21st century culture, there's just too much of everything. A good example of this is music. We've gotten to the point now where you can go out behind a record store or a landfill and find thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions of CDs in the garbage, because as product, it just has no value because there's just too much of it. So let's go back and look at music, the history of music a little bit. So music used to be only available to the church hierarchy and governments who sponsored composers and music. And so we didn't live in an era where there was music around us all the time. We take it for granted now because there's music everywhere we go, and we have constant access to it. But imagine a world that was a lot quieter, and music was a very rare, special, ethereal experience. Imagine the fact that maybe you wouldn't hear music all year, and then you would go to a performance one year, or a group of musicians would come to your village, and you'd have that experience. And how wonderful that would be. And as time went on, of course, music moved away from government monarchy sponsorship and church sponsorship and moved into secular society and became available to the masses. And that's a great development, and as it should be. But then you move into an era where technology allows us to have access to music all the time. So first, music gets a little devalued because we have radios, and music all of a sudden is available all the time, 24 hours a day. And then you move into recording as well, and music is very convenient and easy access, and all of a sudden you find an environment where music is around you all the time. And just in that process alone, it becomes very devalued. I mean, how much time you spend out there where there's music around you, and you pretty much don't even pay attention to it. So there's a good example of the devaluation of music. And I'm all for the fact that people have access to the production and recording and distribution of music. And a lot of unique and interesting voices have an easier time getting their vision out there. But on the other hand, when you have this glut, it certainly makes it harder to find music of value and music that will remain timeless, because we're inundated with product. And of course, this goes for books too. I mean, you think about the fact that reading and books were not a common thing in the ancient world and moving into the medieval world. And so places, churches that had libraries were amazing places, not just because they were amazing architecture and a home for the religious leaders of an area, but the fact that they had all the knowledge, all the written knowledge was in these church libraries. So there's a case where books were extremely valuable. The inventing of the printing press and the mass distribution of literature and religion and books was a great step. But now we're in an era where, of course, you go to a landfill and there's tens of thousands of books in the garbage. There's dumpsters full of garbage. There's boxes of paperbacks thrown in the garbage. And this same concept can be extended to just about everything that we can think of. Music and books and art and television and the internet and media and technology and all the convenience and choices. How much convenience do we need? How many choices do we need? Where all of a sudden there's so many that you can no longer make a choice because there's just too much. Clothing is a good example. Look at the reams and reams and piles of clothes crammed in all these stores out there, and they constantly recycle them every several months as new styles and new trends take over. And then, large shipping containers are sent all over the world, taking all the clothes that didn't sell, and all the secondhand clothes, and inundating third world markets. Which is a good thing for them, I suppose. But just another example of how much there's just too much of everything. Look how much value television used to have when it was 4, 5, 6 channels. Of course, the information was restricted, but each individual show had a lot more value. Well, now we have 1,000 channels, and people flip through them every couple of minutes. And, so all that programming loses value. Not that television programming has as much value to begin with, but there's just too much, and it's lost its value. The internet is just so overwhelming. There's just so many choices, and so many blogs, and so many shopping sites, and so many personal websites. And of course, I contribute to that. Here I am on YouTube, adding to the glut because there's too many commentators and too many videos. So I'm aware of my own place in this conundrum. And you also have technology. There's just too much technology. People's lives are consumed daily by using all their technology, whether it's televisions, radios, their computers, their iPads, there's Kindles, their Blackberries. I mean, it's just constantly swallowing up all their time because there's just too much. And this is part of one of the reasons why our culture is where it's at, because the individual has been overwhelmed. For example, you're overwhelmed with information. Another thing that there's just too much of. And so for me as an activist, for example, I have to pick and choose my issues. Yeah, I'm worried about mountaintop removal mining, and I'm worried about dolphins getting caught in tuna nets and things like that. But I have to focus on the big issues, the assembly of the police state, and more wars on the horizon. So once again, there's just too much of everything. And this brings up a number of aspects of this society we live in, where there's through sheer volume, things are devalued. We have a culture of planned obsolescence, where product is issued and then disposed of instantly, and then the next product is bought. And that's our business model. That's our economic model now, planned obsolescence. And that's another reason why there's just too much of everything. Another part of this is cognitive dissonance. The government and the elitists and even the corporations and manufacturers all count on the fact that you're going to be bogged down in cognitive dissonance. There's just too much information. There's just too much that takes up your time. And of course, this helps de-radicalize society. In earlier times, you'd have a younger revolutionary class because they would spend their time reading books and paying attention to what's going on. Well, now they get bogged down in the fact that there's comic books and fanzines and video games and blockbuster movies, and they mine the whole legacy of Bohemian culture going back hundreds of years. And that's what takes up the time, because even for them, there's just too much of everything. And this is how the government works. We have a 24-hour news cycle, and you are just bombarded with information, and the government depends on that. So there's a lot of different layers to how this works. Cognitive dissonance, planned obsolescence, overwhelming the individual, loss of value through supply and demand, too much convenience, too many choices, too much of everything. So that's my bottom line. Although I do like the fact that there is a lot for me to choose from. I have access to a lot of media that gives me the kind of information I'm looking for. I can search out the programs of value that are available on that vast wasteland of television. I can access art that has value to me out there, because there's a lot. I can access lots of books and literature that I'm personally interested in, and I can wade through the vast landscape of corporate product out there to find music of value. But then the bottom line becomes my time is being pulled in so many directions that I have less time to devote to each of those things that I'm interested in. So how much convenience do we need? How many choices do we need How much product do we need? How much information do we need? So I'm sure the pictures become clear that for better or worse, there's just too much of everything. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.